Romans chapter 2. Finished chapter 1, and I told you that I wanted to each time we meet on Sunday to do a chapter. There's 16 chapters, just 16 weeks. We'll do the whole book of Romans, a chapter per Sunday, and then we go back and revisit chapter 1 slowly and go through the whole book in more depth, because I want to give us an overall view and then back in depth. That's what I wanted to do. God overruled me again. So he's still the head of the church, and so we're not going to do that. And but there's an example of being flexible. You know, it's good to have a plan, take it to God, and then see what he says. So we're only going to do a few verses instead. Now, last week we, as I mentioned, we finished the chapter, and we saw really the results of natural man after he has eliminated God out of his mind. Now, God has said in his word that I exist. I can't go away just because you don't believe in me. But man does believe that God will go away, just like an ostrich puts his head in the sand when he sees danger and he's hoping it'll go away, but it doesn't. And so man, natural man, has pretty much put his head in the sand thinking, no, there's no judgment, there's no God, there's no right or wrong, no absolutes. It's all situation ethics. You know, situation ethics, there are some people that believe that. I think that was pretty much the philosophy of Germany prior to World War II. Kant, you remember him, the philosopher, and Kierkegaard, if you study philosophy at all. Situation ethics, the situation determines right or wrong, your decision-making ethics. It's not always the same. It just depends on the situation, the culture, the time. Not true. God says that things are right, things are wrong. Things are good, things are bad. Things are evil and good. There's a right and a wrong. There's darkness, there's light, there's truth, there's error. There's God and there's the devil. There's saints and there's ain'ts. That's it. And if you're an ain't, that means you're not a saint. A saint is a sanctified Christian. So if you're an ain't, you should be a saint. And you can be by believing in Jesus Christ. God bless you. Just kidding. But I'm not about what I said. So absolutes. Yeah, now I mentioned Germany because if we don't learn from history, you know, we're going to repeat it, someone said. It's true, isn't it? What was the result of that situation, ethics, philosophy? What was the fruit of it? We saw World War II. We saw the Holocaust. And we see the fruit of that kind of thinking. Well, we pretty much still, that kind of thinking still goes on. And so Paul writes to us about this, and he says that the wrath of God, verse 18 in chapter 1, is going to be revealed against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of man, Romans 1:18. And one of the reasons why he's going to judge, or his wrath is going to come upon ungodly people, is because they what? Verse 18, they suppress the truth. They hold it down. They hide it. They refuse to believe it, and they make up their own views. I think evolution's a good example of suppressing the truth. God says that he created all things. Ungodly people say no, that evolution is how we came about. That's an example of suppressing the truth. He says in verse 19, because what may be known of God is manifested in them, for God has shown it to them. So Paul is driving home this argument that man is without excuse because God has revealed himself through natural revelation, through creation. The heavens declare his glory. So man's without excuse. Truth is attainable. Truth can be known. But man rejects the truth, suppresses the truth, holds it down. He says, and therefore God's wrath or judgment will come upon him. But yet, we also know that God is not willing that man should perish. He takes no pleasure in judgment. We read here in verse 16, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ." I'm here in Romans 1:16. "For it is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes." And so, yes, God has provided salvation. Notice, salvation is what? It's from God, the power of God. It's not from man. Man can't save himself. Something we need to understand, the Bible is very clear about. Man is lost. He cannot save himself, even though he attempts to all of his religions and philosophies. They're all of Cain. They're bringing their own offerings and they'll be rejected. Salvation is of God through the power of God, as God breaks through the darkness that Satan has blinded the natural man, but yet man is still responsible for his decision because we were made in the image of God. We're the offspring of God. We're really have been given a birthright of salvation, but we got ripped off. Satan came in and deceived man, but man is still responsible for his rejecting of God, because God has made himself known to us, as he points out here, through natural revelation, creation, also through our conscience, because we were made in the image of God. We know right from wrong. Even people that have never heard of the Ten Commandments, in their culture, they know right from wrong. They know it's wrong to steal. They know it's wrong to murder. They know it's wrong to commit adultery. They know it's wrong to lie. It's written in our heart, so man's without excuse. Even though through the fall, man's heart and his conscience has been affected in a negative way, he still is responsible for knowing right and wrong. And so he says that because, verse 19, what may be known of God is manifested in them, for God has shown it to them. So the revelation through natural creation, also a revelation through our conscience. And he says, verse 20, "For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes." Now notice this. Remember Jesus said that God is a spirit, therefore invisible. So here again, we see how the Bible is very consistent. He says, speaking of God, his invisible attributes are seen. So since God is a spirit, all of his qualities are invisible to man. However, we do see his creation. Notice he says, are clearly seen as you look out into the universe, as you look about the world, as we look at our own bodies. We see God's creative hand being understood by the things that are made. So we can't see God because he's invisible, but we can see the things that he made. Now, for years they were trying to say the cell was simple, the simple cell. Now they know there's no such thing as a simple cell. It's got a motor in it. Who put the motor in the cell? You ever wonder about that? When you look at nature, like I look at insects. I'm not going to talk about my favorite insect, the bombardier beetle. But he is my favorite insect because he has no defense at all. He's a bug. He's a beetle. There's no help for a beetle. You know, they have no defense. But this guy, when he gets attacked, he bends over and he lets out some gas and he rubs his legs together and explodes. It's a bomb. And the guys run off. Now you got to give God some credit for that. So I think I'll make a bombardier beetle. And then he made these other beetles that don't have that bomb, and they see how successful he is, so they fake it. And they just go, ah! But there's no bomb there. They're fake bombardier beetles. But you ever see, like, sometimes you'll be hanging around, looking around, and you see ants, or maybe an ant by himself, and he just kind of run, you go, hey, you lost. You know, where's that guy going? Now, can you imagine if you had a little black ant and you had to put a little brain in him, and what kind of tools would you use? And then how would you put a little brain together to tell that guy what to do, where to go, and all that? Well, anyway, okay, I'm going a little crazy. That's probably a little LSD there. But God is clearly seen by what he's made. And that's a good argument. See, God says to man, come, let us reason together. You and I. Even though your sins are red as crimson, they'll be white as snow. I can forgive you, but you've got to reason with me. You've got to acknowledge that I'm right about this thing. You're a sinner. You can't save yourself, but I have provided salvation for you. It's through my Son. And if you'll just repent of your sinful life, I can forgive you and I can cleanse you of your sin, and I'll maintain my justice and be able to save you, because I'm a just God. I can't just let sin slide, and I've dealt with it. But you got your part too, man. You've got to acknowledge and agree with me that you are lost, helpless, sinful, and that I created you, and you have fallen from my standard of perfection, but I provided a way to bring you back. But man, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I don't believe in you. I'm not going to bow my knee to somebody I can't see. And it's just the Bible. It's just print on ink on pages. And he comes up with all these ideas of why he shouldn't, but we know it's pride. Did I share with you last week about Naaman the Syrian? May have been second service. And he had leprosy, and he was a Syrian. He was a famous, very well-known soldier in Syria. And they were attacking northern Israel at the time. The kingdom was divided at that time. It was after Solomon and the kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. And this Syrian had captured an Israeli girl and brought her back, and she was a maid in his house. And Naaman was very successful, very powerful, but he had leprosy. Leprosy, by the way, is a type of sin. There's no cure for it. And so she said to him, you know, there's a man in Israel, a prophet, he could heal you. And so, you know, desperate because of his situation, he gets his army together, and he rides to Israel, and he comes to Elijah's house and has a servant go up and tell him that Naaman the Syrian is here, and he's got all of his armor on and his beautiful horse and all these soldiers. I mean, he's a powerful man, great, famous soldier, but he needed help. And Elijah sent his servant out and says, just go tell him to dunk 7 times in the Jordan River. He'll be okay. He'll be healed. So he went out and he told him, and Naaman was mad. He says, doesn't he know who I am? He sends a servant out here to talk to me. He says, I'm not going to do that. I got cleaner rivers in Syria than this muddy Jordan River. And he started to go back. And Naaman's servant came to him and said, hey, look, came all this way, you know, why don't you do it? Can't hurt, you know, I mean, why not? And so he talked him into it. So he went over and he dunked 7 times in the river, and he came up a 7th time, and he was healed of his leprosy. And he rode up, but he almost missed. See, the point being here, he almost missed his cleansing, his freedom from sin, leprosy. Because of what? Pride. Almost missed it. Elijah, of course, wouldn't take any gifts. The story kind of goes on. Elijah's servant went after him and said, well, he changed his mind if you could give us some stuff. It's funny. But don't miss the main point. Pride almost kept him from his salvation. And pride is going to keep more people out of heaven, I believe, than anything else, barring maybe religion. Religion is going to keep a lot of people out of heaven. People are trusting in their religion, trusting in their church, trusting in some ritual or baptism, trusting in their identification with a church instead of being born again. And so God has clearly revealed himself through creation, through conscience, his eternal power and Godhead. So notice verse 20, they're without excuse. Man is without excuse. If there's one thing man is good at is what? Excusing himself. You know, today you find there's no drunkards. The Bible used to call drunkards. Now they're alcoholics. And they got a disease. But you know, let me tell you something. Some of you maybe been through AA and you're going to come up and argue with me later. Don't waste my time or yours. The Bible says that drunkards will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. I don't believe it's a disease. I believe that the disease is sin. Now, if you want to go with you're an alcoholic and you inherit it from your dad, he had an elbow problem, and you have the same. I was a drunk. I was never an alcoholic. I drank for 10 years, pretty much every day. And when I became a Christian, I stopped. God gives you the power to stop. The Bible says drunkards will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. Now, if you've got a disease, then it's not your fault. And that's what people are looking for. I can remember watching television some time ago, and they had, of course, down in LA, and of course every major city has our homes where we house people and feed them, and they're necessary. You know, there's a lot of people that fall into hard times, particularly nowadays, and we need to support that. But what I take issue with, though, is we get this attitude about alcoholics, and so, you know, here's a drunk, and we immediately look at him, we're thinking it's not his fault, he's an alcoholic, he inherited it somehow, and we say, hey, John, so you're an alcoholic? Yeah. And I bet your parents didn't love you very much, right? You didn't get a lot of love in your house. Yeah, that's right. That's it, boy. Yeah, that's us. You see what I'm getting at? We look for excuses. We're all sinners. We're all tweaked. We can't save ourselves. But God will save us. It's the power of God. But we take part in it. We receive it or we reject it. We can suppress the truth or we can agree to the truth and then take the right action. He says, man is without excuse, because although they knew God, verse 21, they did not glorify him as God, nor were they thankful. So two things, actually three. God's wrath is going to come upon the natural man. One, because he suppresses the truth. Truth is attainable, it's knowable. He suppresses it. Two, we read here, he does not glorify God, doesn't acknowledge God. And then three is he's not thankful. And we're to be thankful for what God has done for us. Every one of you has a testimony that's saved here. Out of being a drunk or a drug addict or maybe just being self-righteous. But he saved all of us. And we need to glorify him and be thankful and acknowledge him. Now, what we find here, though, is once you eliminate God out of your mind, he still exists. He can't stop existing because we've eliminated him out of our mind. But the inevitable consequences is that there's a downward fall from there. Once you've rejected God out of your mind, you suppress the truth, you don't glorify him as God, and you're not thankful, you're on a downward slide. And that's exactly what we read here. Next, we're going to find that you're going to profess verse 21, not thankful, but became futile in their thoughts. Futile in their thoughts. You begin to become, have foolish ideas about life. And their foolish hearts were darkened. And then what happens? They profess themselves to be wise, and they become fools. And they seek to change the glory of an incorruptible God into some kind of image that they have created themselves. Usually, in my case, I created a God who was very pleased with my lifestyle. Isn't that funny how that worked out? He goes, "You're an okay guy, Ron. You don't do that much coke. You don't hurt people. You know, you don't get sloppy drunk. You get drunk, but you're not sloppy about it, and you have a job, and you're a pretty good guy. I'm sure you got a nice place in heaven." I go, "Hey, my God really likes me. I created him." So you see the downward fall. Therefore, we read that God gave them up to their uncleanness. And then we see the progression. Now they began to exchange the truth of God for a lie. And so now they get involved in what's going to happen when you don't have God as your ruler. God now is not your master, your Lord. Who's that leave? You. Now you're the master of your ship. You're the captain of your ship, and you're going to sink because you're not a good captain. And our flesh is not a good ruler of our life. But if you don't have God's Spirit ruling your life, your flesh will. And what happens is you get involved in all kinds of sexual sin. And he describes it here, all the way from fornication to adultery to homosexuality. That's what happens when you reject God. And he talks about it here. And he says, God gave them up. Okay, you don't want me? Then you can go ahead and rule your own life. But this will be the fruit of it. And then in verse 28, even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to what? A debased or deprived or reprobate mind. And they begin to do things that are shameful. You have some extreme cases, of course. Most people, for the most part, are involved in, non-believers are involved in moderate to light sin. But then you have heavy sinners as well. So it's just a matter of degrees, but man is sinful. You have some cases where when they talk about these pedophilers and they want to release these guys, and they're telling them, don't release me because I'll go look for a little boy, because they've been given over to a reprobate mind. And yet, you know, our liberal counselors, they think we can fix this guy. We can reprogram his brain, you know, and they don't see what the Bible has to say about this. And being filled with all unrighteousness, verse 29. And then he mentions the types of sin that they get involved in. And this is all because they suppress the truth and they reject God. And he says in chapter 2, therefore, this is because of all this. Whenever you get to a therefore, he's saying because of all of what I've just said. He says, you are inexcusable, O man, whoever you are, who judge, for in whatever you judge another, you condemn yourself. For you who judge, you practice the same thing. So now he kind of checks us a little bit. See, now, Christians, well, we don't practice this stuff. Well, Paul said in another gospel, Corinthians, he said, and you once were like this, but now God has set you free. Okay, well, maybe we don't practice these sins, but they're in our hearts.
You've been watching Calvary Chapel Pacific Coast with Pastor Ron Wilkins. We are located at 6400 Westminster Boulevard in Westminster. Service times are 8:30 and 10:45 every Sunday morning and 7:30 p.m. on Wednesdays. You can also get more information at our website at ccpc.org. Thank you for watching Calvary Chapel Pacific Coast with Pastor Ron Wilkins.
I could see clear.
It's been said that if you were arrested today for being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you? Last week in the Middle East, a woman was raped and murdered for carrying a Bible. In China, pastors are routinely imprisoned for decades simply for preaching the gospel. And in Africa, a child was butchered for simply saying her prayers before bedtime. In America, we sometimes make little effort to express our faith because few really care. Billy Graham once said, "The last generation asked, 'What is truth?' But today's generation asks, 'What's the point?'" Dictators fear Christianity because of its powerful influence. But in America, it often seems to have very little influence at all. The question is, who's influencing you?